Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard, along with your host, Bill Stierle. And Bill, sometimes I feel like deja vu, where we've talked about a principle in the past, and it bears repeating when something happens in our usually in our political world, in our government, or in our society. And this is the principle of the facts don't matter. That's really all about the soundbite.
This is it's unsettling the way truth is handled, and truth is handled more from a place of exposure than it is from a place of information dissemination. So if I'm trying to get the facts out about something, or if I'm trying to get the impression about something, it's better to put out the impression and let facts and truth sit on the rubble pile behind it, because I'm just interested in the impression. How many times is it, how many times am I going to get exposure? And that's, good marketing and good branding, and I'm going to do exposure, and I want my product or my service or my identity to be promoted in such a way that I'm going to really focus in on and be able to handle this messaging forward, so that I am going to look like something I want to look like. And whether it's a politician or a product or service, it's the same function. I am going to be seen. So if I were to start a rumor, notice I just started that thing, that Hasbro purposely did the Mr. Potato Head thing just to bring the issue of Mr. Potato Head back to the front of the media. And the whole thing was a publicity stunt, of which I do not know if that is true or not. And if I was to make up this imprint and somebody was to pick it up and hear this podcast and go like, that Bill Stierle knows something about that, that makes a lot of sense. As soon as the sentence, it makes a lot of sense, its truth starts to gain strength, that it was a publicity stunt, and that now they sold X number of Mr. Potato Heads and Mrs. Potato Heads, because you need both the Mr. Potato Head and the Mrs. Potato Head, so they can play with each other, and you could take their ears and nose and head, and you can interchange them on the build your potato head any way you want to build it. So just to see, and I have not looked at the sales of Mr. Potato Head, but I'm feeling a great deal of confidence that they sold a few more of them before the messaging came out, is that it was just going to be potato head,
not Mr. and Mrs., because we need to be, gender politically correct these days, right?
And they could have just put all the parts inside one box, instead of making a separate Mr. Potato Head with its own packaging and a separate Mrs. Potato Head with its own packaging. I could just put everything in there, both the Mrs. parts and the Mr. part, and you can design the potato head any way you want. The company might even be thinking it's a cost-cutting thing, because you just call it a potato head and you just put the different parts in, and then the person can make it either a Mr. Potato or a Mr. Potato Head. It doesn't have to have separate packaging. You see, all of a sudden I went into this was a financial decision. I don't have to make the printing material. I can actually put it all in one box and just call it potato head.
Well, and the interesting thing, Bill, is you talk about, propagating a certain truth or just propagating a message that really is not based in truth, right? It's getting further away from truth on the truth scale. And really we saw a big example of this in the last week with the American Rescue Plan, which is the big COVID relief bill, right?
Right. Yes.
Where Ted Cruz gets up on the Senate floor and makes an outrageous claim. Well, outrageous to some, maybe not so outrageous.
Well,
to
it had
others.
a sliver. It had a sliver of truth. I don't like this much, but he just made it into a mountain. The way he described it.
Yeah, he said that if you vote for this plan, millions is the word he used. Millions of illegal immigrants are going to get stimulus checks. And that was something that he knew would really make his base upset.
And do you know how much exposure and how much money that statement, that minute and a half, 2-minute statement, 3-minute statement, I don't know how long he talked, how long that statement as a media bite on Fox News and right-wing media will go? It's like they'll run it as a loop. And who is getting presidential exposure now? Ted Cruz is getting presidential exposure.
Ted Cruz is, and the value of it has to be much more than the exposure of a commercial during the Super Bowl, because it's getting played everywhere.
That's right.
And
on both sides, the left-wing media pick it up. Instead of handling it the way they need to handle it, they handle it from a position of outrage instead of staring it down from a position of observation. If you stare it down from a position of observation, I'd really wish media people would start doing this, but they really just kind of stink on it, and then all they've got to do is proportionalize it, and it cuts out the energy of it. It's sort of like this cleaning material that is in this spray bottle is only vinegar and water. That's all it is. Oh, you mean it's not fancy schmancy blue, green, red, yellow stuff that really smells good? Yeah, that's it. It's vinegar and water. It's like, just talk about it from the observation place. Don't talk about it from how outrageous that they claimed it would clean the surface when all it was vinegar and the water. And the answer is, yeah, it was vinegar and water. Instead of just take it straight, and play it to the level of which the truth of the truth of it.
So you got to give Ted Cruz credit, because he just buried in the headlines his whole Cancun fiasco. That's in the rubble. That's the truth in the rubble behind him right now that you were mentioning.
Right.
And now his entire constituency in Texas, who's very upset about illegal immigration and, people draining our, government coffers of our tax dollars, they very much don't want to just give handouts, and he just gave them something to latch onto, even though there was only a very partial truth in it. What he said was very largely untrue. They will never ever hear that, any kind of explanation of the facts. To them, they'll be like listening to Charlie Brown's teacher.
Right.
It'll be like wah 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 wah. They won't hear it. So I'm going to just shed a little light on the truth here for our listeners. And I have a link to an article in the blog post at purchasingtruth.com that they can check out. But
good.
So just very quickly, for the sake of truth, since this podcast is called Purchasing Truth, the American Rescue Plan does not give stimulus checks to illegal immigrants across the board. What it does is, if you have a social security number, legitimately, you have a visa, you were allowed to be in the United States and allowed to work, and you paid taxes from that work. So those are some of the bars you have to meet, the hurdles you have to have climbed, which means if you haven't filed 2020 taxes yet, that a lot of people have not, you have to have filed 2019 taxes. So you have to have worked back in 2019, have lived through this whole pandemic, and still be here today.
Yes.
Because if you don't have a 2020 tax return filed, they look to your 2019 tax return. So anybody who's such a recent immigrant that hasn't filed a 2020 taxes yet and didn't have a 2019 taxes, you're getting nothing.
Right.
So you have to have been here for quite some time, lived in America, have been contributing to society, working and paying taxes in order to receive this. But it is possible. What the sliver of truth in what Ted Cruz was saying is that if you had a visa in 2019, you were supposed to have left the country by now, because your visa's for a period of time, or it has to be renewed.
Right.
If you overstayed your visa and illegally overstayed your visa, and then we're still in that category that you paid 2019 taxes, you had a job, you did work, whatever, that you might get a stimulus check. Yes, that is actually the sliver of truth, that you might. And they said there's potentially, about 500,000 people that may fall in that category, but it's not millions and millions of illegal immigrants are going to get stimulus checks. So, I mean, personally, I don't personally have a problem with somebody who's actually been in this country living through COVID-19 that actually worked in 2019 and paid taxes, getting a stimulus check. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. Actually, I think they probably are some of the people in this country that need the most help.
And they're stuck here. They can't go back to their country. There's all these obstacles, let alone not having the money to get there. But it's also they're in here and they're not going anywhere because they're meeting the need for safety and protection for those around you, and they're being considerate. And and that is the positive story that I am spinning into this message. And the idea of if I want to reinforce the message of immigrant bad, well, I want to spin the other story. And all we got to do is just pick what station do we want to watch, create an outrage on this. And whatever side you want to watch, the outrage is going to be a need of mine hasn't been met, fairness, which is the need, or identity, or equality or equanimity is not met because they don't belong here, is the belief. Instead of going like, they applied, they came here, they're working, they pay taxes in, and what we're doing is caring for people that are inside this country. Just do that part of it, and let the truth run from that position, and know that it's not going to be perfect. But again, one of the problems with our media and one of the problems with the internet being is all you got to do is just get this thing out there and there's exposure, and the soundbite wins.
Well, and it's very interesting here, Bill, because there are two sound bites that got propagated. One is Ted Cruz, stating the belief, or maybe he didn't even believe it, making the statement that if this Democrat bill is passed, millions of immigrants are going to get stimulus checks. And that's the soundbite that gets propagated on right-wing media, and that he wants to propagate to shore up support for his reelection candidacy or whatever he wants to do next. And then you have the soundbite of Dick Durbin of Illinois, I think the second ranking Democrat in the Senate, who came up right after Ted Cruz, saying that Ted Cruz knows that's a complete lie, and basically using the liar, liar, pants on fire defense. Unfortunately, not very powerful, but left-wing media, or other media, just plays Dick Durbin
Right.
pointing out, calling Ted Cruz on that lie, but the right-wing media isn't going to play that soundbite and people aren't ever going to hear it. So here's how one amendment that Ted Cruz was proposing, I think, to the American Rescue Plan is what this was. And that amendment got voted down, gets absolutely polar opposite media play, depending on the audience that it's being played to.
Yes, and the challenge that we have is that it is a marketing, branding, messaging challenge of how can I snip this up into small little pieces to create the story I want, the story / conflict that I want to promote. And I know that I mean, this must have been like one of the early episodes that we were doing. There was a time when the tennis player John McEnroe was at Wimbledon and was talking about he was having trouble with the surface because it was wet. And they cut it in such a way that it sounded like that he just hated playing in Wimbledon. And he just goes, wait a minute, you folks, and he literally stared him down and says, now let's not do that. Don't do that. In other words, I'll get angry about the things I'll get angry about and cover those, but don't cut something together and cast me in that way. I didn't say any of the things that you just said. And you just took 3 sound bites and snipped them together and made it a thing. It wasn't a thing, but you didn't take the whole thing. So,
this is very interesting, Bill. I mean, the soundbite matters is very true. The truth doesn't matter because I think largely either side of this debate over Ted Cruz, the people that Ted Cruz aligns with their belief bias are not going to even look for the truth. They're just going to hear Ted Cruz that aligns with their beliefs. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Those liberals are trying to give money away to everybody. And then, people that are more on the other side of the political spectrum are going to hear, Dick Durbin, what he said and see what Ted Cruz said, get angry about it and be like, oh, that's just like Ted Cruz to lie and try to get media attention. And a lot of them probably think he's trying to repair his position after his Cancun fiasco, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And the truth is lost in both of those messages, really.
Right. I'm gonna tell him if I'm a fan of Ted Cruz, I'm gonna tell the story of he's fighting for me against immigrants. If I'm not a fan, I'm gonna say how cold and callous can he be for leaving his people to freeze in Texas instead of doing something about it, taking some way to help some certain group of people to, in his state instead of taking his family to Cancun. If I'm on his side, I would then rationalize it. I would then say, if I was him, I would take my family to Cancun because, who really cares about those other immigrants? And if they freeze in their bed, I don't care, because that's what I voted for in Ted Cruz, is a person that really doesn't care about freezing poor immigrants. So it's a tragic way to reinforce a bias, to reinforce a narrative, and these messages of disconnect that get the soundbite that gets it to go viral. See, somebody could go through this audio right now and actually pick the very definitive sentences that I've said, weave them together, and make me into a right wing or a left wing pundit, just that based on how they would like to cut or edit my voice and get this to go together. Now, of course, they're not going to use that last narrative that I just did. They're just going to pick the sentences from earlier and they say, well, here's a small sentence he said, and then he said this sentence here, and then he said this sentence here, and that's who Bill Stierle is.
It's really easy to do in this age of modern technology to cut sound bites, edit them together. Anybody with a laptop can do it. I'm sort of remembering back, and this is going to date me a little bit, but do you remember the trial of Klaus von Bülow in Rhode Island in the early 80s? He was accused of murdering his wife in Newport, California. They made a whole movie about it, starring Jeremy Irons and Glenn Close, called Reversal of Fortune. Anyway, Alan Dershowitz, the famous attorney and professor from Harvard, defended Klaus von Bülow and won. And there was a scene in that movie, if you watch it, or it happened in the news in New England at the time, that somebody had secretly recorded Alan Dershowitz saying certain things in private, and they spliced together the audio tape the hard way before we had computers and digital stuff, to make it sound like Alan Dershowitz was manufacturing evidence in that case with taking things out of context. So this sort of thing has been done, throughout history to try. I'm sure it was even done before there was recorded media, quoting people out of context in a newspaper, right?
Right.
To make it appear a certain way. Bill, there's another thing that's been going on in our culture in the last couple of weeks that is kind of similar in that how, somebody can hijack truth to really serve their own agenda. And it's what's happened with the Dr. Seuss organization in the books. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, that's a good one. You
mentioned, Mr. Potato Head earlier, which is another one that's happened in our popular culture recently. But the Dr. Seuss thing, a lot of people out there, different organizations, are trying to say, hey, the liberals are trying to censor Dr. Seuss. They've taken that news about from the Dr. Seuss organization, which is an organization that's built that has the right to publish all of his books, to republish them, and they're trying to promote the best, I guess, of Dr. Seuss. That organization on their own decided, hey, there are these 6 books Dr. Seuss wrote and published. They're not his most popular books. And, in the context of the times they were written, they were acceptable. But today in 2020, we're feeling that they are not the best message. They're not putting presenting Dr. Seuss in the best light. We're no longer going to publish those books. So this governing body that has the rights, the copyright rights to publish Dr. Seuss books, has said, we're not going to publish those books anymore. And that news got lost in the media sound bites of trying to turn it into a cancel culture thing, which it's not. And trying to turn it into censorship, which it's not. Other than it's self-censorship. I mean, you own the copyright to a book. You can choose to publish it, or you can choose not to publish it. Dr. Seuss organization was not saying, hey, we need to pull these books from every library and we need to burn them. They're just saying, we're not going to publish them anymore because they're not the best messaging today. And when you look at some of these books and what they are, I mean, one of them depicts, Dr. Seuss characters with a decidedly Asian features in their faces and things. And it's actually been equated with the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's. Did you ever watch Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Oh, sure.
Where Mickey Rooney played an Asian person, a Chinese person, and at the times when that movie was done, that was acceptable. In today's culture, that would be very offensive if somebody did that today, and you didn't have an actual Chinese person playing a Chinese character in the movie. There are things that were done back then that were acceptable, and all the Dr. Seuss organization is saying is, hey, we're just not going to publish these books anymore because they had their time and their time is done. And that's it. But this whole news has been really hijacked in so many ways to try to fit certain organizations' agenda that's really kind of similar to this only the soundbite matters, because they're getting their soundbite out of it. Oh, cancel culture.
That's
Oh,
right. That's right.
censorship,
Censorship.
and
It's really about a organization holding to integrity and sensitivity in a culture that is evolving to be more forward in their thinking about being considerate and mutually respectful. And it's not like we're all of a sudden we're going to get to where mutual respect between races and and ethnicity and all, we're not going to get there like we're going to switch off and do that. It's going to be a process that we need to like face in a brand new way. The process of deciding on what do we want to stand for as human beings. What do we want to stand for as Americans? What do we want to stand for? And are you going to stand for somebody taking a sliver of truth and making a mountain out of it, and then allow that person to gather votes because of it, or gather exposure? Or are you just going to not cover it and just go like it wasn't worth covering because we see what he's doing? And I would prefer like Dick Durbin to say somewhere in there, respect. We are going to respect this body. And sir, what you just did is cross the line on respect, because you took a small sliver of truth and made it large just to get a soundbite. Now, if that was the media thing that went out, they couldn't, it's really hard to ignore it. It's like, this is what you did. We saw you do it. We know the good reason why you did it.
oh
Yeah,
can you
just to
imagine
get
if
eyeballs.
can you imagine if Dick Durbin had done that, but also went one step further and said, like you said, Bill, you took a small sliver of truth and turned it into a big lie. Just how you went down to Mexico just for one night to bring your girls down there was turned into the real reason you went down. I mean, maybe he could have said it better than I just did, but imagine if Dick Durbin had done that and equated it and not let that news soundbite that Ted Cruz is trying to put out bury and put his trip down to Cancun in the rearview mirror. Instead, illuminated it and showed, hey, you have a pattern of doing this, taking a partial truth and trying to make it be something it's not.
And just pointing out that there's a strategy in this, and that there is the strategy of getting the need for respect and recognition and acknowledgement met through marginal truth has been a strategy all the way back to McCarthyism. The war on drugs is there in that same thing. The war on drugs is, how can I arrest certain groups of people? That's all. Well, what do these groups of people do? Well, let's make marijuana illegal. Then we could throw all the war presters and the hippies in there, just plant some drugs on them and throw them in jail. Or a person of color, plant some drugs on them, put them in the things, because then we supposedly have the moral high ground. But really, you're just targeting and using whatever the instrument is, and you're covering what the truth is that you want to combat dissension from your advocacy or the thing that you would like, which is leadership or power or money or whatever that thing is. And all of a sudden it becomes justifiable. I mean, we have a mental health problem in the United States, and it has to do with using substance to cover trauma. Do you think people are just going to cover that one? No, they ain't going to cover that one. It's too hard to cover. You have to like think and do things. So really, really valuable stuff. And I think that this is not going to be the end of this story, Tom, as we kind of move forward here. It's not the end of, only the soundbite that matters, because this is the way truth gets purchased, is just whatever soundbite gets to go viral and move ahead.
Oh yeah, this continues to happen and will continue to happen over and over.
Yeah. And so more to come on that. We'll, further episodes, we'll take a look at how can you measure more directly towards this strategy so that, it doesn't take hold as toxic as it's currently taking hold. I think that would be really important thing to stare that down.
How you get the soundbite to further illuminate the real truth? Is that what
That's
you're
right.
suggesting?
That's right. Yeah.
I like that, Bill.
How do you do it? Yeah. All right. Well, more to come, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.